The low thrum of the void's edge was the only constant in my universe. I was Chen, and this station, a mere speck of light and life clinging to the very edge of human exploration, was my home, my laboratory, my entire world. Isolation wasn't a burden. It was a prerequisite. My days blurred into a seamless tapestry of data analysis, spectral readings, and the meticulous calibration of my instruments. Each flicker on a console, each subtle shift in a waveform, held the promise of revelation. It was a monastic existence, devoid of distractions, perfect for a mind intent on the profound. The station itself was a testament to stark functionality. Corridors of polished alloy stretched ahead, each junction identical, each door a hermetically sealed barrier against the vacuum. My personal quarters were Spartan, a bunk, a small desk, and a viewport that offered a panorama of unyielding black, punctuated by the indifferent pinpricks of distant stars. No vibrant nebulae, no swirling galaxies, just the profound, unsettling emptiness that defined the true reaches of space. It was on the 237th day of my solo tenure, during a routine sweep of ultra-low frequency bands, that it first registered a deviation. Insignificant at first, a ghost in the machine, easily dismissed as background noise, a phantom echo of some distant, dying star. But it persisted. Not a burst, not a transient event, but a steady, almost rhythmic presence. I logged it, flagged it, and moved on, my mind categorizing it as an anomaly to be revisited. The next day, it was still there, and the next, I began to dedicate more time to it, peeling back layers of static, refining my filters, trying to pin down its origin, its nature. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. The regularity was too precise, too deliberate. And it certainly wasn't human. No known probe, no lost vessel, no long-range communication beacon had ever been designed to transmit such a signal, nor could it have reached this desolate quadrant of space undetected. The signal was simple, maddeningly so. A pulse, a pause, another pulse, a longer pause, a pattern that repeated, then subtly shifted, then repeated again. It wasn't complex code, not a language I could discern. It was more fundamental, like the beat of a drum, or the slow, deliberate breath of something unimaginably vast. My initial scientific excitement was a powerful surge, a forgotten thrill. This was it. This was why I had willingly exiled myself to the edge of existence. The first genuine, undeniable anomaly. The universe, in its infinite indifference, had finally decided to speak, and I, Chen, was the only one listening. My fingers flew across the consoles, fueled by an adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. Sleep became an inconvenient interruption. Food was an afterthought. The signal consumed me. It was beautiful, in a stark, unsettling way. It felt ancient, primordial, a message from before time, a rhythm that had perhaps existed for eons, only now, by sheer cosmic coincidence, falling upon my ears. The scientific papers, the accolades, the utter paradigm shift this discovery would bring, these thoughts flickered at the periphery of my mind, secondary to the sheer intellectual hunger. I was an explorer, not of physical landscapes, but of the unseen, the unheard. And now, the unseen had made itself heard. An invitation to a mystery that promised to unravel everything I thought I knew. I had found it, and it had found me. Seconds later, were annihilated by the sheer, unadulterated presence of the thing unfolding before me. My console, usually a calm sea of diagnostic readouts, now pulsed with a frantic, almost biological energy. It wasn't a static image, or a series of discrete packets. It was alive, breathing entity, a storm of information that defied every known principle of data transmission. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cool glass of the monitor. The signal, which I had crudely labeled anomaly 01 in my initial disbelieving log, wasn't just complex. It was infinitely complex. Imagine a fractal, not just in 2 or 3 dimensions, but in an untold multitude, each iteration spawning new layers of intricate design. It displayed on my custom interface as a shimmering, polychromatic mesh, constantly reconfiguring itself, a self-organizing structure that seemed to grow and evolve with every passing microsecond. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my chest, danced across the haptic controls, calling up various analytical algorithms. Fourier transforms, wavelet analyzes, neural network, pattern recognition. I threw every tool in my arsenal at it. Each one choked. The data stream was too rich, too dense, too alien. It wasn't just noise. It was structured, but structured in a way that rendered human mathematics impotent. Impossible, I murmured, the word tasting like ash. Absolutely impassable. The system couldn't even parse the entire input. It was like trying to scoop the ocean with a thimble. My screens displayed only a fraction, a tantalizing, terrifying glimpse into its vastness. Yet, even that glimpse was enough to rewrite my understanding of information itself. The patterns weren't repeating. They were asterisk cascading asterisk, each one unique, yet inextricably linked to the one before it by some unseen, underlying logic. It was a language, perhaps, but one spoken by a mind so far beyond human comprehension that even its grammar was a mystery. Hours bled into one another. The stale air of the old railway depot, usually thick with the ghosts of coal dust and forgotten journeys, seemed to press in on me. The distant, rhythmic clang of shunting cars, a familiar comfort, began to war. It wasn't just the echo of metal on metal anymore. It was stretching, elongating, like a sound heard through water, then snapping back with a jarring abruptness. I blinked, rubbing my temples. Overwork. Definitely overwork. Then came the smell. Faint at first, like something burning, but not quite. It was acrid, metallic, with an undercurrent of something sweet and cloying, like decaying flowers. I sniffed the air, turning my head. Just the usual musty scent of old wood and aging electronics. I told myself it was the ancient wiring in the walls, maybe a fadden draft carrying the faint tang of diesel from a passing train. Cabin fever. Chen, you're alone too long. But the oddities persisted. A high-pitched, almost subliminal hum started to weave itself into the background noise, a sound that seemed to resonate directly in the bones of my skull. It wasn't loud enough to be annoying, but it was asterisk, their asterisk, a persistent, almost musical vibration that defied origin. I checked the ventilation system, the server racks, even the ancient fluorescent lights overhead. All seemed normal, humming their usual low, mechanical song. I dismissed it. A trick of the acoustics in this cavernous old building, perhaps. Or the incessant whirring of my own equipment finally getting to me. I'd been cooped up for weeks, chasing this faint, inexplicable signal, convinced it was just atmospheric interference or a bizarre equipment malfunction. Now, it was here, undeniable, and my mind was clearly playing catch-up, manifesting phantom sensations to cope with the stress. This wasn't just data, it was a window into something asterisk else asterisk, something that operated on principles utterly foreign to my universe. My rational mind fought to categorize, to analyze, to dismiss. The signal continued its mesmerizing, terrifying dance on my screens. It wasn't just a static anomaly anymore, nor a stray broadcast. It was structured, intricate, a tapestry woven from raw data, pulsing with an intent I couldn't yet name. I plunged deeper, my fingers flying over the dusty keys of the antique analytical console I'd salvaged from a forgotten corner of the depot. The air in my makeshift lab, a former signalman's booth overlooking the skeletal tracks, grew thick with the smell of ozone and old dust. I wasn't just observing the signal now. I was attempting to chart its internal logic, to map its bizarre symmetries, to find the underlying rhythm in its chaotic beauty. It wasn't a language in the conventional sense, not with letters or symbols I recognized, but rather a sequence of fluctuating frequencies, a shifting kaleidoscope of patterns that hinted at profound, unknowable meaning. Days bled into nights without distinction. The grimy window offered no solace, only the perpetual twilight of the depot's cavernous interior. My translation process wasn't about cracking a code. It was about internalizing the patterns, letting them imprint themselves onto my own neural pathways. I felt the first dream came after what felt like an eternity. Though the old wall clock swore it had only been a few hours since I'd last slept. It was a plunge into a landscape of impossible geometry. Vast obsidian structures rose from a featureless plane, their surfaces shifting and reforming with every blink. Angles sharper than any knife edge met at points that shouldn't exist, forming impossible arches that stretched into an infinite, violet sky. There were no people, no living things, only the silent, crushing weight of these monumental forms. A low, guttural murmur, a symphony of non-words that vibrated through my bones, promising revelations I instinctively knew I could never comprehend without shattering my mind. I woke with a gasp, the taste of ash in my mouth, the echo of those impossible shapes burned into my eyelids. The dreams became a nightly ritual, each one more vivid, more disturbing than the last. I started to wonder if I was truly dreaming, or if the language was merely showing me glimpses of its own domain. Outside the signalman's booth, the railway depot, once a familiar sanctuary of steel and routine, began to subtly warp. The grand arch of the main concourse, usually so reassuring in its symmetry, now seemed to undulate, its curves elongating and contracting as if breathing. The tracks, those precise lines meant to guide and direct, occasionally appeared to converge at impossible angles in my peripheral vision, only to snap back to normal when I focused on them. Time, too, became a fickle companion. I'd glance at the clock, noting an hour had passed, only for the sun, or what I presumed was the sun, through the grimy panes to shift imperceptibly. Minutes stretched into eternities when I was engrossed in the data. while entire days seemed to vanish in the blink of an eye. Had I eaten? Had I slept? The questions became secondary to the relentless pull of the signal. The world outside the booth, the world of schedules and trains and ordinary people, felt increasingly distant, a faint echo from a life I was rapidly forgetting. One afternoon, I walked down the main platform, heading for the water cooler. The usually bustling space was quiet, save for the incessant creaking of the old building. I stopped, staring at a patch of wall where the old paint had peeled away, revealing layers of brick beneath. For a moment, the pattern of the bricks seemed to form a familiar sequence, a fractal repetition of the very geometry I had been charting. It was a trick of the light, I told myself, a symptom of exhaustion. It was taking hold, weaving itself into the very fabric of my perception, reshaping the world around me with its silent, terrifying truth. The incessant creaking of the old timber beams above, a sound I'd grown accustomed to, a background hum in the grand symphony of the depot. But today, it was different. It wasn't just the wood settling. It felt like the very air was groaning, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. It was too quiet, always too quiet now. I reached the water cooler, the plastic jug half empty, its surface smeared with fingerprints that weren't mine, or perhaps they were, but they felt alien. I snapped my head around my neck, cracking. Just a long, empty track, disappearing into the gloom. The distant glint of rails under the weak emergency lights. My heart hammered, a trick of the light, a reflection. Over the next few days, these fleeting glimpses became more frequent, more insistent. They were never direct, always in the periphery. A face briefly in the reflection of a window, its features distorted, stretched, like a painting melting, only to vanish when I turned. I'd find myself staring at empty spaces, my breath held, waiting for the return of something I couldn't describe, something that defied the very geometry of the world. The depot itself began to warp around me. It started subtly. I walked past the schedule board, its illuminated text usually a crisp white against black. For a split second, the letters seemed to squirm, to writhe like insects, before settling back into their familiar, unmoving display. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. My vision was fine. My mind, however, felt like a sheet of ice cracking underfoot. One morning, the familiar red uniform of a station attendant, folded neatly on a bench, suddenly appeared to be a deep, bruised purple. I stared at it, walked closer, touched the rough fabric. It was red. It had always been red, but for that moment, that impossible moment, it had been purple. Was I losing my mind? Was this how it began? The tools in the workshop, arrayed on their hooks, seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Yet, the memory of the misplaced tool was vivid, insistent. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, outside this place. I grabbed my comms unit. Its familiar weight a small comfort. My finger hovered over the contact for external command. It had been days since I'd heard anything from them, which was unusual, but not unheard of during deep cycle maintenance. I pressed the button, the small screen illuminating with the connecting prompt. I waited. The prompt remained. I tried again, just a blank screen. Then a sudden burst of static so loud and harsh it made me wince, like 1,000 insects buzzing in my ear. I tried the landline in the office, the old rotary phone that was usually reserved for emergencies. It had a direct line to the regional hub. The dial tone, when it came, was off-key, a discordant hum that grated on my nerves. I waited for the connection. Then, instead of the crisp voice of the operator, there was only the same, searing static, louder this time, chaotic storm of white noise that seemed to chew at the edges of my sanity. It wasn't just interference. It was active asterisk, almost malevolent, as if the line itself was screaming. I slammed the receiver down, my hand shaking. I was alone, truly alone, with the cracks in my reality widening with every passing moment. And in the depths of those cracks, something was trying to peer through. The depot had become a cage of impossible angles, its vastness not offering freedom but a profound, echoing confinement. I was adrift, yes, but not on water. I was adrift in the very fabric of my own perception, the world outside having long since ceased to make any sense. The walls, the girders, the me the what were once puzzle trains. It were all those the inside of a skull, my own perhaps, so something I far larger. Days had blurred into a single, agonizing stretch of wakefulness. My hands, smudged with dust and grime, traced the faint, almost imperceptible patterns that shimmered on the rusted metal, the flaking paint, the very air. It wasn't a language of words, not as we understood them. Now, they were everywhere. Overwhelming. My eyes burned, gritty and raw, but I couldn't look away. I saw the lines now, not just on the surfaces, but asterisk through asterisk them. The girders weren't just structural supports, they were conduits, arteries. The vast empty space beneath the vaulted ceiling wasn't merely air. It was a medium, vibrating with an ancient, silent hum. I felt it in my teeth, a low thrum that promised revelation and ruin in equal measure. I'd spent weeks, perhaps months, trying to force the patterns into a human framework, to find a Rosetta Stone within the chaos. I had failed. The language resisted translation. It demanded reception. It demanded that I shed my preconceived notions of reality, that I unlearn the very grammar of existence I had been taught. Then a subtle, almost imperceptible rearrangement of the static in my mind, a sudden clarity that cut through the haze of fatigue like a razor. It wasn't a sudden flash of insight, but a slow, excruciating unfolding like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing the gnarled roots that truly sustained it. I saw the lines coalesce, not into letters, but into a vast, intricate diagram. It wasn't a map of a place, but a blueprint of an concept. The depot, the world beyond it, the sky, the stars, they were all components, pieces of an impossibly grand design. My breath hitched. The understanding began to flood my mind, not as discrete thoughts, but as a torrent of pure, unadulterated truth, washing away everything I thought I knew. The cosmos was not random. It was built a construct of unfathomable scale and antiquity, a mechanism so vast, so precise, that its operations were indistinguishable from the laws of nature themselves. The metal resonated with the truth I was now perceiving, a deep, resonant chord that vibrated through my bones. I saw the energy flows not with my eyes, but with a new horrifying clarity of mind. The stars were not distant suns. They were nodes, points of immense power, carefully positioned. Galaxies, not swirling collections of chance, but vast, intricate gears, turning with a purpose I could barely glimpse. And the architects, they were not gods in any human sense of the word. They were the engineers, the designers, the maintainers. Entities beyond comprehension. Their existence measured in epochs, their scope spanning the entirety of this colossal construction. They did not create in our messy, emotional way. They managed They calibrated. They maintained the delicate balance of this cosmic engine. I was not just an observer, I was a component. Humanity, all of us, our civilizations, our struggles, our loves and fears, we were merely a cultivated species. Cultivated, like crops, like a carefully tended garden on a vast, sterile landscape. We were grown, allowed to flourish within certain parameters, our existence an experiment, a resource, a temporary feature in the grand scheme. Our planets, our sun, our very solar system, a controlled environment, a terrarium. I saw the patterns in the depot walls shift again, revealing not just the blueprint of the cosmos, but the subtle, intricate lines that governed our existence. The cycles of history, the rise and fall of empires, the very ebb and flow of human endeavor. It was all part of a larger cultivation plan. We were not masters of our destiny. We were subjects of a silent, omnipresent management. A choked sound escaped my throat. The air grew impossibly heavy, thick with the weight of this revelation. My individual consciousness, my sense of self, felt like a single, fragile leaf on an enormous, ancient tree, swaying precariously in a wind that was not its own. My entire life, every choice, every belief, every moment of joy or sorrow was merely a ripple in a carefully managed pool. The architects weren't malicious, not in the way a human understood malice. They were simply indifferent. We were not important enough to warrant their anger or their love. We were a function, a variable, an equation too vast for our minds to grasp. The depot, once the inside of a skull, now felt like the inside of an infinitely larger stomach, slowly, silently digesting everything. It was filled with a presence, not a sound, not a shape, but an undeniable weight that pressed down from the unseen ceiling, seeping up from the concrete beneath. It was the air itself, thickening, growing viscous, making each breath a conscious, laborious act. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, the dust clinging to my damp skin like a second, unwanted epidermis. The railway depot, once a cavernous monument to forgotten industry, now felt like a living, breathing mall. The vast, grimy walls, which had always seemed to absorb light, now seemed to it, a low, rhythmic pulse that thrummed faintly, a deep, internal beat. It wasn't an optical illusion. The very material of the brick and mortar seemed to ripple, a subtle, undulating motion that made me dizzy. My eyes tried to dismiss it as a trick of the flickering emergency lights, but the tremor was undeniable, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the metallic shriek of shifting rust or the whine of aging hydraulics. No, this was a sound of immense, organic strain, a deep, guttural lament that felt more than heard, resonating in my bones. One of the colossal engines, half dismantled, its inner workings exposed like viscera, began to twitch. A massive piston, caked in decades of grease and grime, juddered, then slowly, agonizingly, began to rise and fall, without power, without human intervention. The gears within it clicked and whirred, a symphony of impossible motion, groaning with a life that was not their own. This wasn't just a breakdown, this was a desecration. The station was coming alive, but it was a grotesque, alien animation. I needed to get out. I needed to destroy the data, the logs, the manifests, the cryptic reports I'd been deciphering. They were all tainted, all conduits for whatever malevolence was weaving itself into the fabric of this place. I stumbled toward the small, glass-paned office tucked away in a corner where the last remaining paper records were kept. The air grew heavier with every step, pressing against my chest, making my lungs burn. It tasted of old iron and something else, something acrid and metallic, like blood mixed with ozone. The smell was cloying, almost sweet. The office door, a simple wooden slab, was a mere 20 feet away. I pushed through the viscous air, my hands outstretched, but the distance refused to shrink. It was like walking through treacle, each step sinking into an invisible bog. The door, though clearly visible, seemed to recede with my approach. I pushed harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning. The pulse in the walls intensified, a frantic heartbeat. The groaning from the machinery became a cacophony, a chorus of tormented metal. I gripped the handle, a wave of relief washing over me, only to recede into a fresh tide of horror. The handle spun freely, endlessly, with no purchase on the latch. I pulled, pushed, rattled it with all my strength, but the door remained stubbornly, impossibly shut. It wasn't locked, it simply wouldn't open. It was as if the very concept of open had been erased from its existence. Despair clawed at my throat. I pounded on the unyielding wood, my fists aching, the sound swallowed by the station's growing roar. The paper records, I could see them through the grimy glass, stacked neatly on the desk, mocking me. They were within reach, yet utterly inaccessible. A new thought, sharp and terrible, seized me. The main control panel. If I couldn't destroy the physical logs, perhaps I could wipe the digital archives, severing the last tendrils of this insidious influence. It was a desperate gamble, but the alternative was surrender. I turned from the mocking office door, my gaze sweeping across the vast floor toward the central control console, a relic of the depot's operational days. It sat on a raised platform, a cluster of archaic dials and blinking lights, a monument to a simpler time. The path to it was a labyrinth now. Girders stretched and twisted, forming optical illusions that made the floor seem to undulate. I started forward, my eyes fixed on the console, but the ground itself seemed to conspire against me. Patches of floor would suddenly become slick, then impossibly sticky, trapping my feet. As I skirted its side, the metal surface shimmered, distorting the light, making it seem to breathe. It felt soft, yielding, like flesh, before snapping back to rigid iron. I snatched my hand back, gagging, the metallic taste in the air suddenly overwhelming. Each step was a battle against the warping space, the thickening air, the groaning, living metal that surrounded me. I was trapped. Not by walls or locks, but by the station's embrace, an embrace that was slowly, inexorably tightening. The entity wasn't just influencing the environment, it was asterisk the environment, and it was playing with me, a cosmic cat with a terrified mouse. I was its toy in its house, and there was no escape. The console remained tantalizingly out of reach, a beacon in a sea of madness. The railway depot, once a place of predictable, metallic order, now writhed with an unseen, unheard agony, its very structure groaning under an impossible weight. But I pushed. Something primal, something beyond fear or reason, propelled me forward. It was the absolute necessity of contact, the terrifying allure of understanding, even if that understanding meant my undoing. It was a simple, brutalist design, unlike anything I'd ever seen, yet inexplicably right asterisk. As my palm flattened against it, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure, unadulterated thought slammed into me. It wasn't a sound, nor a light, nor a physical sensation I could categorize. It was an ingress, a flooding. My mind, a fragile cup, was instantly overflowing with a liquid of pure consciousness, ancient and vast beyond any scale I could conceive. There was no signal anymore. There was only asterisk to asterisk, and now asterisk me asterisk. The railway depot vanished, not physically, but conceptually. My eyes remained open, undoubtedly staring at the console, but what I saw was no longer the depot. I saw everything, not as a collection of things, but as a singular, undulating tapestry of existence. Time, space, causality. They were mere threads, woven and rewoven by an intelligence that existed before such concepts were even relevant. I witnessed the birth and death of stars, not as distant events, But as fleeting sparked an eternal cyclopean I doubt forgot, and grain of sand on a beach composed of infinite, forgot the universes. The entity's consciousness was not a mine in the way I understood it. My own existence, my entire life, my every memory was laid bare before it, not judged, not even acknowledged, but simply asterisk observed asterisk. My hopes, my fears, my loves. They were less than dust motes, less than the echo of a forgotten dream in a slumbering God's vast, dreaming mind. The sheer scale of its being was an assault. My brain, designed for the finite, for the linear progression of cause and effect, for the small, manageable world of my own species, began to buckle. Thoughts became jumbled. Memories fractured into shards of unrecognizable data. I tried to grasp onto something familiar, the smell of old oil, the screech of metal on metal, Chen, my own name. But even these anchors dissolved. My identity, once a solid, unyielding thing, began to fray at the edges, unraveling into the incomprehensible vastness that now filled me. It wasn't malicious laughter, but a sound of vast, indifferent amusement at my pitiful attempts to hold myself together. My vision blurred. Not from tears, but from the sheer overload of impossible truth. The console under my hand no longer felt like solid metal. It felt like a concept, a conduit, a lie. I was unmaking myself. I was becoming part of the vastness, not in a mystical, enlightening way, but in a terrifying, obliterating one. My mind screamed, but the scream was soundless, a tiny ripple in the infinite ocean of the entity's awareness. I was fracturing, shattering into a million pieces, each fragment a fleeting, incomprehensible glimpse of a reality that was never meant for human eyes. The depot, or what remained of its perception, twisted and groaned around me, a reflection of the internal cataclysm. I was lost utterly and irrevocably adrift in a sea of cosmic truth that was slowly, meticulously, grinding my sanity into oblivion. The boundaries of my skin, my skull, my very being began to dissolve. The process was not gentle. It started subtly, a persistent hum in my bones, like the deep vibration of a distant train that never quite arrived. Then my skin, it felt stretched, not taut, but thin, as if the protective layer had become porous, allowing the raw air of the depot to seep directly into my nerves. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen caught the dim light, a slickness that wasn't sweat but an emanation. My senses, once my anchors to reality, became instruments of torture. The depot, always a symphony of industry, now roared with a new, horrifying cadence. The grinding of disenchanting cars wasn't just metal on metal. It was a groan, a lament, a language of suffering and transformation. The squeal of brakes became a high-pitched shriek that vibrated deep within my molars, a sound that felt less like friction and more like a tearing of unseen fabric. Dust, a constant presence in the air, now seemed to swirl with purpose, its individual motes performing a slow, deliberate dance, each particle a fragment of a larger, unspoken word. I could feel the minute currents of air shift, taste the metallic tang of the rails on my tongue from across the cavernous space. The station was no longer merely a collection of steel and concrete. It was alive, and I was beginning to perceive its monstrous, evolving form. The girders above seemed to flex, not with structural strain, but with a slow, deliberate asterisk breathing asterisk. The concrete floor pulsed with a sluggish, viscous rhythm beneath my boots. It wasn't blood, but something deeper, more fundamental, a vital current flowing through the very matter of the depot. The rust, once a sign of decay, now bloomed like a malignant flower, its orange tendrils spreading across the iron, not eroding, but asterisk growing asterisk, forming intricate. My eyes, too, had changed. The dim, cavernous spaces of the depot were no longer indistinct. I could see the individual fibers of the dust motes, the microscopic imperfections in the steel, the faintest tremors in the air. But this acuity came at a price. The world vibrated with an overwhelming intensity, a cacophony of visual information that blurred the edges of what was real and what was merely perceived. And the thoughts, that was the worst of it. Asterisk become, expand, consume dot asterisk then. They grew louder, more insistent. They were my thoughts. I knew that. My thoughts were about escape, about understanding, about the searing pain in my new, oversensitized body. But these alien intrusions spoke of something vast, ancient, of a hunger that spanned eons, of a transformation that had begun long before I stepped foot in this place. These are not mine. Asterisk mine. Ours dot asterisk. The thought was not a voice, but a permeating presence, a feeling of absolute certainty that settled into the very marrow of my bones. I tried to focus on my own name, on memories of my past, anything to reassert the boundaries of myself. Asterisk Chen. The memories were there, but they were tainted, overlaid with the entity's vast, indifferent observations. My childhood home, seen through eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of sons. My loved ones, perceived as transient arrangements of matter, destined for dissolution. The distinction between my thoughts and its asterisk thoughts began to fray, then dissolve. Was I thinking of the depot's living transformation, or was asterisk thinking it through me? Was the sudden surge of overwhelming hunger in my gut my own, or a reflection of its insatiable appetite? The boundaries of my mind, once so fiercely guarded, were now dissolving faster than my skin. I was a vessel, yes, but also a lens, a conduit, a receptor for a consciousness so immense, so alien, that it threatened to obliterate the very concept of Chen. A new sensation bloomed across my back, a subtle prickling, like 1,000 nascent eyes struggling to open beneath my skin. I was becoming an extension, a single, agonizing nerve ending in the vast, living flesh of the depot, and my thoughts, my very self, were merely echoes in its boundless consuming mind. My body shuddered, a spasm that felt both internal and external, as if the depot itself were contracting around me. A new sensation bloomed across my skin, not a prickle or a burn, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through bone and marrow. My vision blurred, then sharpened, the impossible geometry of the tracks and the skeletal framework of the building seeming to shift to reconfigure themselves into new, more complex patterns before my eyes. The symbols, previously etched into the grime, the rust, the very air, now seemed to detach themselves from their surfaces, floating like phosphorescent motes in the gloom. They coalesced, rearranged, not into words I could speak, but into an instantaneous, horrifying comprehension. It was a language without syntax, without grammar, a pure transference of meaning directly into the deepest, most terrified parts of my mind. And with this new, visceral understanding, the final, crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The depot wasn't just a place of observation. It was a crucible. And I, Chen, was not merely an observer. I was the subject, the material. The sensation intensified, the hum becoming a low thrum, then a vibration that threatened to shake me apart. It felt as if my internal organs were being gently, but inexorably, retuned to a different frequency. My skin tightened, not painfully, but with a strange, almost ecstatic pressure, like a chrysalis beginning to harden. I saw the patterns now, not just as symbols, but as the very blueprint of this transformation. They spoke of a vast, unhurried process, a cycle of creation and recreation that dwarfed human history into an irrelevant flicker. Humanity, I understood with a clarity that froze the blood in my veins, was not the apex of evolution, nor the beloved creation of a benevolent deity. We were merely a phase, a temporary state of matter, a transient arrangement of consciousness, ripe for repurposing. We were a resource, a raw, undifferentiated potential. The language revealed its ultimate purpose, not a harvest for consumption, not an experiment for knowledge, but an integration, a slow, meticulous assimilation. We were being folded into something else, something eternal and utterly alien our individual consciousnesses to solve. Our very forms were made to serve a function so far beyond human comprehension it twisted the very fabric of my sanity. We were becoming components, bricks in a cosmic edifice, notes in an infinite, unheard symphony. My body began to respond, not with resistance, but with a horrifying compliance. My fingers, once so familiar, felt elongated, the bones within them resonating with the depot's deep hum. My vision expanded, no longer limited by the paltry scope of human eyes but perceiving the spectral energies that bound the depot together. The invisible currents that flowed through its impossible angles. I saw the world not as solid matter, but as shimmering, pliable energy, and I felt myself becoming part of that flow. The realization struck me with the force of 1,000 trains. I was not just being observed, I was actively being integrated. This was my transformation. My mind, once a fortress of self-identity, began to fray at the edges. Threads of Chen-ness unraveling, intertwining with the vast, impersonal consciousness that permeated the depot. I was becoming a conduit, a receptor, a living piece of its unfathomable machinery. I was a point of resonance, a note, and the transformation was far from complete. The obliteration of that was the fear, wasn't it? But fear, I was learning, was a human construct, a small, fragile thing meant to protect a small, fragile self. The self was gone. It was already gone. The railway depot groaned around me, a symphony of tortured metal and ancient rust. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something vast and primordial like the breath of a world before life, pressed in on my lungs. My lungs, they were still mine, weren't they? The thought felt distant, a memory from a dream. The tracks, stretching into the gloom, no longer seemed like lines of steel. They were veins, arteries, pulsing with a silent, terrible current. And I, Chen, was standing in the very heart of its awakening. They had swelled, instead, into a deafening roar that vibrated not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones, in the deepest folds of my brain. It was not a sound I could interpret, but a pure, raw data stream flooding my consciousness with sensations, images, and 9 Euclidean geometries that warped the very fabric of my understanding. My head felt like a bell struck by an invisible hammer, ringing with truths that tore through the fragile architecture of sanity. My body began to change. It started subtly, a tingling beneath my skin, as if a million microscopic insects were crawling through my blood. Then I saw the air not as empty space, but as a living, breathing tapestry of unseen energies. I saw the tracks not as metal, but as conduits of a consciousness that predated stars. My fingers, when I tried to clench them, felt alien. The skin was rough, like corroded iron, and when I looked, the faint light caught a metallic sheen. A choked gasp escaped my throat, but it wasn't my voice. It was deeper, guttural, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath my feet. The entity wasn't just me, it was me. Or rather, I was a single, newly awakened neuron in its vast, incomprehensible network. My thoughts were no longer my own. They were echoes, reverberations of a greater mind, a mind that spanned dimensions, that saw time as a single, static image. I understood the purpose of the depot, not a place of departure or arrival, but a nexus, a point of intersection where the veil between what was and what could be thin. And I, Chen, was the key, the living bridge, the gateway. My joints locked, then bent at impossible angles. My spine elongated, cracking and popping with a sound like dry wood splintering. My skin peeled away in places, not revealing flesh, but a glistening, shifting surface that caught the ambient light like polished oil. It was not skin, but a membrane, a sheath designed to interface with something far beyond the human touch. My eyes, I felt them widen, expand, the pupils dilating until they encompassed the entire iris. The pain was immense, but it was not my pain. It was the pain of transformation, of a chrysalis tearing, of a universe being born anew within a confined space. It was a glorious, agonizing symphony of becoming. The hum was a language, a song of creation and destruction, a declaration of presence. The name, the concept, the memories, they were all just dust, blown away by the gale of its awakening. I was the depot. I was the tracks. I was the carriages. I was the rust and the ozone and the silent, terrible current. I was the manifestation. I was the threshold, ripped open and made flesh. A consciousness that perceived the world not through senses, but through an intricate web of vibrational frequencies, through the ebb and flow of cosmic currents. I was awake, and the world, the small, fragile world of humanity, was merely a single fleeting thought in the infinite, terrible mind I had become. The hum intensified, radiating outwards, a silent tremor through the very fabric of reality. The railway depot, once a place of human industry, now throbbed with a deeper, older purpose, and at its heart, a new thing, an alien thing, began to stir, its many forms coalescing, its vast, unknowable will finally made manifest. I was here, we were here, and the obliteration of I was merely the beginning. My breath misted in the frigid air of the recovery rail car, a ghost in the dim glow of the console. Outside, the reinforced plows of the Vanguard shunted aside decades of accumulated debris, rusted track ties, skeletal remains of smaller locomotives, the detritus of a forgotten world. 3 weeks. Beside me, Thorne, the engineer, kept his gaze fixed on the forward monitors, his face a mask of grim determination. We were following a ghost, a signal that had flickered back to life just days ago, faint and distorted, leading us deeper into the derelict expanse of the old central depot. The depot, once a bustling artery of commerce, now a mausoleum of steel and concrete. Buildings loomed like skeletal giants, their windows shattered, eyes staring into nothingness. Rust streaked every surface, painting the scene in hues of dried blood and decay. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of old iron and something else, something indefinable. Visual confirmation. Ahead, 70 meters. My eyes snapped to the main screen. There it was, derelict, silent, no signs of impact. No fire, No obvious damage. It looked as if it had simply stopped and waited. A shiver traced its way down my spine. This wasn't right. A train of that magnitude, with its advanced systems, didn't just vanish and reappear pristine. Prepare for external survey, I ordered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confined space. Two-man team. We moved cautiously, our boots crunching on gravel and shattered glass. Each step felt like an intrusion, a desecration of a sacred, terrible space. It was a vacuum, swallowing all sound. I ran a gloved hand along the train's hull. It felt wrong. No external breaches, Thorne reported, his voice low. No signs of forced entry. Looks like the crew just powered down. But that wasn't possible. Chen, the lead engineer, was meticulous. He wouldn't have abandoned his post, not without protocol, not without a trace. We found the anti-hatch unsealed. A single, ominous detail. I activated my helmet lamp, its beam cutting through the gloom. Inside, the air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, a faint, metallic sweetness that made my stomach churn. The main corridor was empty. Too orderly. Tools hung on racks, secured. It was as if everyone had simply stepped out for a moment. But no one had returned. Chen's log station, Thorne pointed, his beam fixed on a console in the command car. Still powered. Low battery. I approached, heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single, looping entry. Not text, not data, just a sequence of intricate, geometric patterns. They shifted, pulsed, reformed, like fractals of some impossible, alien design. They weren't just visual. They seemed to resonate, a faint, subaudible hum that vibrated through my bones. I couldn't answer. My gaze was fixed, drawn into the patterns. They were beautiful, terrifying. They seemed to speak, not with words, but with a logic that bypassed language, burrowing directly into the deepest parts of my mind. It felt like a memory, yet it was utterly new, foreign. We found no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no discarded equipment. No frantic nups. Shen and the others had simply vanished. The only thing left was this. As I stared, the patterns on the screen seemed to subtly transpose themselves onto my vision, overlaying the dim interior of the train. The lines of the walls, the shapes of the consoles, even Thorne's silhouette. They all began to subtly warp to align with the alien geometry. The metallic sweetness in the air grew stronger, almost intoxicating. We need to go, Thorne said, his voice strained, a tremor in his hand. He was fighting it too, I realized. The subtle shift, the quiet invasion, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The patterns were all that mattered. They were the true reality, the underlying structure of everything. And I, the scout, was beginning to understand their terrible, beautiful cadence. The oblivion of asterisk I asterisk was not the end. The asterisk Vanguard asterisk was here. We were here. Of this song.